I can go first. My name is Britton Cleveland. I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am tonight. And I am an organizer with Friends of the Earth, and I work with our activists in Western North Carolina, Florida, a little bit in Minnesota and Colorado, and have been going all in on the Green New Deal campaign. And I'm excited to continue this conversation with everyone and some new folks as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brianna Steele, and I'm an organizer at Friends of the Earth as well. And I mainly work with our activists and volunteers in Central and Eastern North Carolina, and also in Maryland. It's great to be here. And I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina.
And I'm Drew. I'll just round out the Carolinas crew. I'm in South Carolina, in Columbia, in the middle of the state. Excited to be on and talk to you all about April recess and the Green New Deal.
And hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Bach, and I'm an organizer with Friends of the Earth based in Brooklyn, New York. I work with our activists and volunteers in New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and really excited that you all are on. And I see some folks representing my area in Pennsylvania and New York have introduced themselves, so I'd love to feel free to all introduce yourselves too in the chat, you know, your name, where you're from, all that. Nice to meet you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mariah Lauer, and I am a grassroots organizing fellow with Friends of the Earth based in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
And do we have Tiffany on the line? Is that who is calling in? Do we know?
Hey, Liz. Yeah, this is. Pollinators program, and I'm excited to talk to everybody tonight.
Great. Excellent.
Can you repeat, Tiffany, the first part? I don't know, I couldn't hear.
I think I just said I'm getting my video set up, and I'm based in DC.
Great. I thought maybe it was just my line, not everybody's. So you did cut out for a second, Tiffany. I'm sure it'll be fine in a minute. So one of the things that we really wanted to do is talk about a couple of things. The first one being kind of the Green New Deal and fossil fuels. So I think most of you heard me go over the agenda that we're finishing introductions. We're going to jump into a discussion around the Green New Deal and fossil fuels. And then we are going to move into a discussion on the Green New Deal and food. And then we're going to talk about April recess plan. And then we're actually going to walk people through a quick training. And that training is around how to meet with a decision maker. And we'll be talking about that for a couple of minutes and really giving you some tips and some tools as to how to do that. And then when we're finished with that, we are going to do a quick question and answer. And then finally, we are going to kind of give you the next steps and close. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. As Jenny said, please introduce yourself in the chat. Everyone who's on the phone and on Zoom will be able, if you're actually on your computer, you can see what people are talking about in the chat. That's an incentive for the people who have only called in, that if you do have access to a phone or even on your tablet or your cell phone, that you can click through on Zoom and actually see the chat and see what people are talking about. So the first thing I wanted to say is, it's no big secret that there was a vote yesterday at 4 o'clock on the Green New Deal. I think this is really confusing for a lot of people, and it was intended to be confusing. Mitch McConnell likes to pull scams. This is what he does. This is what he's always done. So yesterday he pulled a scam by having a vote on the Green New Deal resolution. He did that intentionally to try and shame the Democrats on wanting to stand up and address climate change. The vote was 57-0. What we saw is that all Republicans, 1 independent, and 4 Democrats voted no. And all the rest of the Democrats, to really send a very strong message that they weren't going to play games with Mitch McConnell, voted present. The thing that I want you to know about what happened yesterday is that the oil, gas, and coal industries had contributed $55 million to the senators who voted no on the Green New Deal resolution. That was literally 11 times more than those who voted present. I want that to sink in. This isn't arbitrary games that they're playing. This is funded by the fossil fuel industry to make sure that there's a set of our decision makers that are putting their profit over addressing climate change, over addressing community impacts, and over the health and safety of many of the workers who work in this industry. They are out to make sure that the fossil fuel industry can continue to be making literally billions of dollars on the backs of local communities. One of the other big problems currently on the language as it's written on the Green New Deal is the current resolution says a lot of really good things about renewable energy, but it actually doesn't say anything about directly addressing fossil fuels. That's a huge problem. We are not going to be able to solve climate change without directly confronting the fossil fuel industry. And we're also not going to be able to protect communities. By leaving it out of the Green New Deal, 1, it wouldn't actually do what it says that it would. And 2, it's sending a strong message to the communities who've already been affected by the fossil fuel industry that it's totally okay with our decision makers if they're sacrifice zones. And it's allowing our decision makers to completely hide behind this. There's some language in there around something called net zero emissions. Basically, that says we can still do what we want to on fossil fuels, and we're going to have a few technology pieces that will help us address this. Now, last week, one of our organizers went to New Hampshire and had an exchange with Beto on camera, asked him whether or not he would support a Green New Deal that actually addressed fossil fuels, including natural gas. And the thing you should know about Beto is he's gotten an awful lot of money from the natural gas industry. They have wanted to really invest in Texas, and so they've really been investing in decision makers in Texas like Beto. And he essentially said, I support the Green New Deal's plan for net zero emissions. Specifically, to answer your question about fracked gas, we may still use some. He basically went and said, yes, I'm for the Green New Deal, but I'm not for stopping fracking. This is exactly why we have to directly confront folks and make sure that they're hearing loud and clear that that's not the right answer. That is not actually supporting the issue. And it's no great surprise that Beto did that, because at one point he had actually signed a commitment to not taking money from the fossil fuel industry. And this last round of his election cycle, he decided not to sign it again because he wanted that resource from the natural gas industry and from the rest of the oil and gas industry in Texas. It is telling that that's where we're sitting at, that someone running for president feels totally comfortable saying, yes, I support a Green New Deal, and yes, I support fracking. Now, a lot of these concerns have been a central reason that we've been seeing a bunch of the frontline and fence line groups expressing concerns around the existing language of the Green New Deal, because of the same worries they have, that the language is not structured to actually address the fossil fuel projects that are impacting their communities is one of the top things they're raising. They're also raising that there's a lot of concerns about the language not going far enough to make sure that their voices, the communities that are actually being impacted, would be central to deciding what does the solution look like? What does a Green New Deal look like in these communities that have been so impacted by the fossil fuel industry? I want to talk a little bit about what is the impact in communities and what have we seen? What does it mean for a Green New Deal to essentially not address sacrifice zones? For many years, I worked closely with frontline communities who are fighting fracking. There's communities in Pennsylvania, there's communities in Wyoming, there's communities in Texas. There's a community that a lot of people have heard a lot about, which is Dimock, Pennsylvania, where there's been so much fracking and so much impact on the local water supply that the entire community over the last 10 years has essentially been saying that their water isn't drinkable. There's an oil and gas company called Cabot who owns most of the wells. Now, the state of Pennsylvania actually found them in fault. They said, yes, they're responsible for this. You would think that that means that they have to clean up the mess, that they actually have to make it so that the community members have healthy drinking water. Earlier this year, their reaction was to sue one of the activists who had been saying my drinking water is poisoned for $5 million for raising media awareness on the issue because they said that they thought it was affecting their bottom line. They're poisoning an entire community and they're able to try and retaliate against one of the community members whose water is now poisoned, who has not been able to drink his own drinking water for a number of years. On the other side of the country in Wyoming, a friend of mine, John Fenton, who's a rancher, has been dealing with this for years. Probably about 5 years ago, we were talking about, well, what did it mean to have his water so poisoned? He told me that in the middle of a Wyoming winter, when it's like -10, -20, it's the kind of numbers that as an Easterner, I can't even fathom that on a daily basis that it was so cold there, that anyone in his family would take a shower. They would actually have to leave the window open in that cold weather because the amount of fumes that were coming out of their water supply was actually making him and his family sick. He finally, after years of fighting to try and clean up the water on his ranch, wasn't able to keep his ranch. He wasn't actually able to make his ranch work anymore because the water was so poisoned. This is what it means to actually be in a situation where things like fracking are just allowed to continue under a Green New Deal that actually doesn't address it. Now, if you've moved down to the Gulf, a lot of people think the biggest oil spill was the BP disaster. It was actually the Taylor Energy spill, which has been going on for more than 15 years and has leaked 500,000 barrels of oil, and nobody's doing anything about it. And in fact, under the last two administrations, including the Obama administration, so both Trump and Obama expanded drilling in the Gulf. Many of you probably were involved in the fights around Keystone or the Dakota Access Pipeline. Can you press 1 on your keypad or kind of raise your hand? If you're on the computer, you can put raise your hand if you were involved in any of the pipeline fights in the last few years. If you were involved in standing up on Keystone, if you were involved in doing solidarity around Standing Rock and really trying to fight the Dakota Access Pipeline, if you were involved in the fight currently that's going on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. There's been pipeline fights across this country and into Canada, and I want to see how many of you have already been engaged in that. Now, the thing about this is we know the implications of these pipelines and the implications they actually have on communities and on continuing our dependence on oil and our drilling for oil. We also know that the 5 biggest oil companies, BP, Exxon, Shell, are planning to spend $110 billion on new oil and gas projects this year. And they're only going to spend 3% as much on alternatives. Now, yes, somebody mentioned Josh's films. People should look up Josh Fox. He's done a number of films on fracking. They're really powerful because they actually interview a bunch of the community members and show the real implications of fracking and what it's done to communities across the country. But the reason I'm telling you a few of these stories, and then we're going to move into a discussion with Tiffany about food, is because when you hear the Green New Deal actually just skipped over addressing fossil fuels, that just sounds like a couple of words. But what it really means is it skipped over ending drilling in the Gulf. It skipped over ending fracking in Pennsylvania and fracking endemic. It skipped over stopping the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So it means that we could pass the entire package today, and the oil and gas industry would be allowed to go on business as usual in all these communities, despite the implications, the impacts, and how many people are being poisoned. We don't think that's okay. We are not willing to say that the Green New Deal is good enough unless it actually addresses the fossil fuel industry. So, and I think many of you share our let's keep fighting this and make sure that we have a super strong Green New Deal. So what I'm going to do is actually have Tiffany talk for a few minutes about food, and then we're going to come back to our plan so that we can talk in depth about both these issues. Tiffany, do you want to take a couple of minutes and talk about food? And then at the end, I'll spend about a minute talking about sort of the next steps before we go into April.
Can you hear me, Liz?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I think I'll just give a quick snapshot about why we want to make sure there's a strong food component in the Green New Deal. I think this is probably, again, something a lot of you on the call are familiar with, but just want to make sure we're all starting with the same baseline knowledge. And what we're really concerned with is that the food and farming sector has to be part of the Green New Deal because it is America's largest employer and a top source of climate harming emissions. At the same time, farmers, fishers, farm workers, food chain workers, anyone who works throughout the food supply chain, including rural and urban communities, are all greatly harmed by climate changes, weather disasters and disruptions, and climate upheaval is threatening our nation's food security and costing taxpayers and farmers tens of billions of dollars a year at minimum. Agriculture and specifically industrial food production generate nearly 1/3 of all global climate change emissions, making the food sector a leading producer of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases. And these emissions all stem from industrial agriculture's systemic reliance on energy-intensive toxic pesticides, chemical fertilizers, factory farms, land use change, food processing, transportation, and waste. Plus, a big problem with our food system is that it's highly consolidated, which means that there's essentially a handful of mega corporations in the food and farming sector that really control everything. They're making it harder for smaller and mid-scale farmers to compete, that we're losing hundreds, in some cases thousands of farms a year because a lot of our small mid-scale farmers just can't keep up with our big mega farms and factory farms. And it essentially limits the options that farmers have so that they're forced to use toxic pesticides and chemicals on their farm. And what that means is that it essentially limits all of our options as consumers when we go to the store to purchase our food. And at the same time, it's depleting our soil, our water, and other resources that are critical for a sustainable and healthy environment. One of the things that happened with the Green New Deal is that it noted the need for, and had some wording in the Green New Deal that said it recognizes that eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from agricultural industries and investing in local scale agriculture must be part of the problem. But for us at Friends of the Earth, that didn't go far enough because it really didn't articulate all of the changes that we need to see in our food production system in order to get to a healthy, sustainable, and just food system that's really going to fix our climate crisis. So there's a lot at Friends of the Earth that we think needs to shift in order to get to the place that we need to be. And I'm just going to go through a summary of those changes that we want to see in our food system. We're going to have a more detailed outline of what all of this is, but here's just a snapshot of what we think is really important and that what we've been developing with other organizations that work with farmers, farm workers, other environmental groups, consumer advocacy groups across the country to really summarize what needs to change in our food system. So one, we need to make sure that we're rapidly transitioning away from energy-intensive industrial agriculture system, especially our massive scale industrial meat and dairy production on factory farms. And we need to have a huge expansion of diversified, resilient, organic, and ecologically regenerative farming systems that are based on practices that draw carbon out of the atmosphere, produce more food using less energy and water, and are healthier for people and the planet. We also think that our government has to stop subsidizing environmental damage by giving billions of dollars in subsidies, loans, and research to support large-scale industrial, chemical-intensive agriculture. And instead, our tax dollars should be going to expand support for resilient, local, and regional agriculture and organic agriculture that helps support socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, as well as helping farmers and ranchers transition to organic and ecologically regenerative farming systems. We also have to make sure that we're transitioning to a healthy, diversified, organic, and regenerative food system based on just and equitable support, and specifically making sure that we're moving away from all of the systems within our food system that are built on exploitation and poverty. And we need to make sure that we've got new regulations to restrict methane emissions and other air pollution from factory farms, reduce government support for factory farms, and transition factory farms to more sustainable food and farming systems. We also need to reform our antitrust laws. So this means that we've got to break up mega corporations that are controlling our food system and make sure that we've got fair pricing throughout the food supply chain for farmers, farm workers, and other workers throughout our food system. We also have to make sure that all workers within our food system are earning family-sustaining living wages, have safe, healthy, and humane working conditions, and we have to equalize labor laws so that all agricultural workers have full legal rights, are protected, and have the right to unionize without retaliation. So that's a lot, but we think that we have a plan at Friends of the Earth to help push for that, and we're going to need all of you to help us do that. So as Liz mentioned, we're going to get into a little bit more of how we're going to do this. And one thing we're doing on sort of the food side is working, as I mentioned, with a lot of different organizations across the country to put together a letter that outlines demands and all of these shifts we need to see in our food system. We want to make sure we deliver that letter to Congress. We work together to make sure we're all delivering this message during April recess and beyond to make sure that they get the message loud and clear that we need to have a Green New Deal that also includes a big shift in our food and agricultural system. So I'll stop there and then we can move on.
Great. So I think I'll pick it up here. So thanks, both Liz and Tiffany.
Hold on. There was
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. So a couple of things I did want to say is that listening to me and Tiffany go into some of our concerns of the existing resolution, it could give you the impression that Friends of the Earth doesn't think there's some really amazing and revolutionary things in the existing resolution, or that we don't think that the concept of a Green New Deal is a good idea. We do. We're super excited about it. We think it has a ton of potential to actually address all of these issues, and particularly the resolution. While we have the concerns that we do, there was a lot of reference to public investment. We think that that's 100% necessary in this circumstances. There is a lot of talk about social protections and worker rights. We think that is incredibly important. And there's some real beginning language around centering of racial and economic justice as we start to figure out the plan moving forward. So we're extremely excited about moving a very strong Green New Deal forward. We just know that to do that, we also have to make sure that it's strong on addressing food systems and agriculture, and that it's really strong on standing up to the fossil fuel industry and ending our dependence on fossil fuels and fossil fuel projects. So wanted to make sure that everyone was clear on that. Well, we want to strengthen what's out there, that there are some really amazing things in there. Drew, do you want to talk a little bit about our plan?
Yep. And I'm going to go pretty quick through these things, but there's also a poll at the end. So hang on 1 minute. I'll explain a little bit about what we're thinking about doing in April, and then you get a chance to weigh in on our poll to say what you're interested in doing. So first of all, as Liz and Tiffany said, laying out a lot of things. There's a lot of work to be done on making the Green New Deal better and more perfect. But one thing that's really undeniable is the last couple months, the start of this 116th Congress has really catapulted climate change and a Green New Deal into discussion in a way that they haven't been before, which is hugely important and great to see. For the first time, we've got senators on the floor almost every day talking about climate change. We have no less than 3 different committees on the House of Representatives side opening hearings and investigations into climate change. This is all really good. What we want to make sure is that the next couple of months that we actually produce legislation and really important advances so that we're making a difference on these issues and not just having conversations and moving the conversation forward. So probably our best chance for all of us individually to press our members of Congress to move forward is during April. They have a very long recess this year around the kind of Easter break. Usually it's the second half of April. And basically they'll be home from April 12th to about the 26th. So 2 whole weeks. Every member of Congress, every senator will be back in their district for some part of that. And lots of different people are already planning actions to try and hold representatives accountable and to ask them the same kind of questions you're hearing Liz and Tiffany bring up. What about agriculture? What about fossil fuels and Green New Deal? What do we do to stop sacrifice zones? All of those kind of things, and to really get binding answers out of our legislators. So we want to lay out 4 quick things that some Friends of the Earth Action members and activists across the country are already planning, and we'll give you a chance to vote on them at the end. I'll describe each one real quick, and then you can see if any of that sounds good, or if you have a different idea, we'd love to hear that as well. So just to preview, the 4 things we'll talk about are lobby visits, community meetings, bird dogging, which is where we kind of catch representatives unawares, and office takeovers or office visits. So just to go through what all those 4 things are, probably the most popular option, what most people will end up doing during that April recess time, is to plan a lobby meeting. This is where you make an appointment, you bring maybe a couple of friends with you, and you go sit down in your member of Congress's office with the member themselves or their staff and talk to them about a Green New Deal and these kind of concerns. How are we going to address fossil fuels? How are we going to address agriculture? And you have a real dialogue with the representative. That's a great option. Everybody can do that. And in fact, Mariah and Britton will have a little bit more on how to do it in just a minute. In some districts, we know people are already planning bigger community events. This would be like where you schedule, get a high school gymnasium or some bigger space, and maybe 100 or more people are going to turn out. Sometimes these are also like town hall meetings where the representative shows up and answers questions, or sometimes they're just community forums where the representative either doesn't want to attend or isn't able to attend, but you still have a place for people to ask questions and air concerns as constituents and build a community dialogue around it. So that's the second idea. The third thing you can do, I think that Liz was mentioning this earlier, especially if you live in a state where one of your senators, there's a lot of them, are running for president. There's quite a few people running for president on the Democratic side this year. I happen to live in South Carolina. It feels like every week somebody else is coming through. A couple of them come through to visit. So if you live in one of those states where your senator is running for a different office, or really anytime when, because all of the House of Representatives will be up again in 2020, they're all running, you can use this tactic we call bird dogging. It's basically where you show up to an event where you know your representative or a candidate is going to be, and then you get in front of them to ask a quick question. And I think people have seen this a lot. Often you grab people in a rope line or taking a selfie. Kerry did a great job of this in Massachusetts with Beto, and that's really where we sussed out a lot of that concerning language from him about, yes, he supports a Green New Deal, but he also supports fracking. So especially if you live in Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina or Massachusetts, New Jersey, any of the states where somebody's running for president, this could be a great opportunity to think of if you know there'll be an event where your senator or representative is going to show up and talk about environmental issues, and you want to get in front of them and ask them a question. And last, probably not the first thing most people are planning, but there are some places where we know the representative's been very clear about what they think. Usually it's a Republican member of Congress, and they're very opposed to the Green New Deal. They're talking about it being socialist and terrible and all that. And if that's the case, if that's your representative, essentially, you may not need to go to the trouble to like set up a meeting with them to find out what they think. They've already told you what they think, and there's not going to be a lot of dialogue with them, unfortunately. So in some of those places, people are planning office sit-ins or occupations. And I think folks have seen videos of this where folks have done it with like Senator McConnell's office and Nancy Pelosi's office. People like go take up space in the office, have a kind of a speak out. It's a little bit more confrontational. It can be more kind of aggressive seeming, but it also can help get more media attention on the issue. And again, if your representative is not somebody who's likely to be persuaded by conversation or a town hall meeting or something like that, it may be that it's time to take things up a notch and go take up some space in their office and make them hear the stories of people who are impacted by climate change. So those are a couple of options to think about. And in just a minute, we're going to talk more about how to do the lobby visit. But I'll go ahead and start the poll here. So if you are logged in on the webinar, you should see a poll window pop up, and you can vote for which thing you're most interested in doing during the April recess. Again, just to run down the options, it's you can plan a lobby visit, plan a community meeting, do a sit-in or an occupation at your office, representative's office, bird dog them or catch them at a public event, or something else. If you have a different idea, feel free to say that, and we'll have some time in the Q&A section in just a minute. Great, I see a bunch of folks voting already. So we'll leave this open for another couple seconds while folks are filling in their votes. And maybe while folks are finishing that up, Mariah, if you want to start talking about one of those ideas, the most popular idea usually, and it looks like it's leading in the polls already, how to plan a lobby visit with your representative.
Yeah, I'm actually going to kick us off and then hand it over to Mariah to talk about the tips and tricks for planning a lobby meeting. But I know there's probably a lot of folks on here that have already done a lobby visit of some kind, whether on the Green New Deal or some other issue. Go ahead and raise your hand if you've done that before. I'd like to see how many people who I'm talking to here, see what kind of experience we have. If you've ever met in person with your elected official, raise your hand, or you can chat in one like we did earlier. Could be senators or representatives. See how many folks? Lots of people. Okay. Great. Keep raising your hand. So basically a lobby meeting is a conversation. It's a conversation that we have with our elected officials about issues that mean a lot to us. And in that, it's not just us talking to them, but it's a conversation where they're talking to us back and giving us information that we need. That's really important. And it's also a place for us to ask, have a really direct ask for the elected official. Those are kind of like the two really important principles of a successful lobby meeting, is to have a conversation, collect information, and to make a direct ask. And so during this training, we're going to talk about ways to make this the most successful lobby visit that you can. And this is kind of based on our experiences doing these types of meetings, some tips and tricks that we've kind of gleaned from our experiences. And Mariah is going to talk about, and it looks like from this poll that at least 31 of you want to do a lobby visit, so that's awesome. So tune in for this training. And a couple dozen people have done a lobby visit before, so that's great. Feel free to chat in any experiences or best practices that you have that you can offer that you think would be helpful as well. We'd love to see that. So lobbying is really important. They're elected officials, they're responsible to us, but it's also our job to show up and let them know where we stand, and we need to do that early and often. And by definition, it's, us trying to attempt the actions, the policies, or the decisions of officials in office. It's also really helpful to educate leaders on issues. We can't always go into somewhere and expect them to be an expert. So this is a way for us to kind of act like an expert. But when you don't need to be an expert, you just need to be able to share why it's important to you. But you could also bring, some knowledge into the room that might not be there before. So that's important too. And in the context of a campaign, we like to use lobby visits in the beginning of the campaign as kind of like reconnaissance and gathering information. We use them in the middle of a campaign to check in with our elected officials, to hold them accountable to, the outcomes of our first visit and to keep moving them along. And then we use it at the end of a campaign as well to, again, hold them accountable, making sure they're following through on their promises, or to get commitments that we haven't yet gotten from them. And, a lot of, we're doing these visits, but it's important to know, and it's really important for us to continue doing this work because our opposition is also doing similar work that we're doing. And so, we have this negative connotation of lobbying because we associate it with the black hats and the fossil fuel industry, like walking the halls of Congress, trying to get what they want, kind of the dirty way. But it's important for us to counteract the work that they're doing. And we do that by bringing people to the table. And so that's what we're hoping to do. And so we thank you for, signing up to have a lobby visit to help us, counteract the influence that money has in politics and to show the people power that is clearly behind the Green New Deal. And Mariah is going to take it from here and go through some really specific ways to make it really successful.
All right, well, thank you, Britton. So now that Britton has gone over a bit why we lobby, I'm just going to do a short training about how we go about lobbying and just give you some step-by-step instructions. So throughout this training, there are 4 principles that you should remember. So first of all, have an agenda. Second, you want to tell your personal story. And third, you need to have a clear, distinct purpose or ask that you want your decision maker to respond to. And fourth, you need to give them a chance to respond to your ask. So before your lobby meeting, you need to start planning ahead. And obviously the very first thing you have to do is get that lobby meeting scheduled. So you can find the right office or phone number to call by going to your member website at either senate.gov or house.gov. And a lot of members actually have like a request meeting link on their website, which I have found like really helpful. Actually, that's how I've scheduled all of my meetings with lobby meetings with members of Congress. So to get a meeting on the books, you can either call or use that link, but just keep following up. And if you don't hear back within a day or so, just, be pleasantly persistent. It's always a great, thing because sometimes they can be a little bit slow to respond. So once you have the meeting scheduled, go ahead and start reviewing your legislator and district information. So this is a really good time to start putting like power mapping skills to use, or like I've also heard it called an influence chart. So things like that, it's really start to kind of get some background information about that member of Congress. And then the day before the meeting, you just want to check in with whomever you have the meeting scheduled with, just to confirm the meeting time as well as how long you have to meet with them. And then before the meeting, you also want to start mapping out your strategy because it's a really fun time to strategize about how you're going to approach it. So the first thing you can do is start preparing talking points. And really think about like 1 or 2 sort of important top lines that you want to cover, but that you don't have to have this completely written out. You just want to have a general agenda to go over with your ask written down verbatim. So when you write your agenda, think about things like, how does this impact you personally? Why is this issue important? Why should the legislator care? And what do you want them to do about it? So I lobbied Representative Diana DeGette from Metro Denver several times. And so when we've met with her, we've talked about, how people are really affected by the air pollution in Denver from fracking and refineries that emit hydrogen cyanide in the city. I mean, we told her that we are, worried because Colorado is projected to become a dust bowl with climate change. And so we let her know, like made it very clear that our expectations of her were for her to become a real leader on the issue and actually champion the Green New Deal, not just sort of a tacit endorsement. We wanted her to be kind of out there in front, championing it. And once you do that, then you need to decide your ask and make it relevant and direct. So we asked her, if you won't endorse the Green New Deal today as a show of good faith, will you sign the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge? And then you also need, as you prepare for this meeting, you need to decide who you want to attend the meeting with you. So when lobbying for the Green New Deal, I've strategically invited groups that are focused on economic or racial justice issues and not just strictly environmental groups. And this actually had a really big impact because with it being such a broad coalition, it really, brought to the fore about how the Green New Deal is not just about climate change, it's also about remedying social and economic inequity. I should also decide rules that people should play during the meetings. So you need someone to do intros, someone to make the ask. You want to have a timekeeper and a note taker. And it's always really good for the note taker to be recording, so that way you can get any responses from the legislator on the record. And it's really easy to use something like Facebook Live or something like that. And then people can watch it later. You also want to have materials to leave behind, like fact sheets or news articles or even scientific studies that support your position. And it's also good to bring petitions or letters from constituents who are maybe unable to attend the meeting itself. And then afterwards, you want to make sure that you follow up with a member of Congress or their staff just by sending them an email, thanking them for taking the time to meet with you. And it's also a good time to provide them with any additional information if you said you would. So after this call, we're going to be sending out a lobby toolkit, which will give you lots of good information, and we'll also have a sample lobby meeting agenda for you to use. So I highly recommend using this, and it'll have everything you should cover during the meeting. And it's really good to plan out because I've lobbied with groups as big as 25 people and groups the size of with 5 other people. And you have to plan out your meeting so you can allow everyone the chance to share their 30-second story of self, because that is the most powerful thing you can use. And you also want to make sure you plan to make your ask in the middle of the meeting, so you have plenty of time to do everything you set out to do, and they also have plenty of time to respond. And then as you close and thank them for meeting with you, also make sure that you set up clear follow-up steps. And then there's just kind of a number of do's and don'ts to use when lobbying legislators to keep in mind. So first of all, and this is so important, be courteous to any legislative assistants or staffers you speak with, because you really don't want to alienate them by being hostile, and they could potentially become an ally of yours. In fact, I've had that happen when lobbying Diana DeGette. In fact, I'm on very good terms with her staffer, which makes it a lot easier to schedule more meetings in the future. So yeah, always be nice to the staffers. And next, you want to make sure you stay on topic. So keep in mind, it does happen that sometimes a member of Congress or their staff might derail the conversation. And I mean, I've personally had this happen when I had people show up to the lobby meeting who I did not invite, and they started trying to talk about, methane emissions and other things. And as long as you're aware of it, it's very easy. You can just gently steer the conversation back and say, we're here to talk about the Green New Deal. Also, make sure you follow the 50-50 rule. So, like most conversations, you want to be speaking half the time, as well as listening to what they are saying the other half. Ask questions. So your first question should always be asking your legislator, what do they know about this issue? Because you can't assume that they are experts or they know very much about it. Also, like we said earlier, leave any information that will be useful. Bring news articles that you maybe have great statistics that, again, back up what you're saying. Anything that's useful, go ahead and bring. You always want to say you are either a constituent or representing other constituents if you're not in the district. Also, be flexible, because sometimes offices are really small and some meetings have to be held in the lobby or a hallway or a conference room in a different building. So that's okay, just be aware of that and try to be flexible about time and location and time if you can. Also, so don'ts, here are some don'ts. So don't make assumptions about your legislator's knowledge on any particular issue. And also, you don't have to try to be an expert and memorize a lot of facts, because your biggest asset is actually sharing your personal story and how it impacts you and why you care. And you can emphasize that you are a constituent or a representative of constituents, so the legislators are actually beholden to you. And also, don't get argumentative, so don't need to go into he said, she said. And also, don't get discouraged if the first meeting did not go well. I've actually found it really helpful to have intentionally plan an initial meeting with a staffer, so we can really sort of relay all of our concerns, and they will then give those notes to the legislator. And then I like to schedule a follow-up meeting with the legislator themselves, so they will, be sort of caught up on what we are concerned about, and then we can really understand what is preventing them from acquiescing to our asks. And it's okay to meet multiple times, in fact, because you can sort of, as Britton said, you can really sort of build ground and or continue to gain ground as you meet. You're not going to, you don't have to be upset if you don't get everything you want in the first meeting. And then lastly, make sure you are early, not late. A lot of legislators have really tight schedules. So yeah, make sure you are there with plenty of time if you can. And so that's some of our tips and tricks for lobbying legislators. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jenny, who's going to do our Q&A.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Maria. That was an awesome training. Wow. Even I learned new things, and I've lobbied before. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for already asking lots of great questions. I've been trying to take notes of everyone's questions throughout. But I want to make sure we have time for other people. So if anyone wants to ask a question and you're on the computer, just go ahead and chat it in the chat box, and we'll monitor the questions there. Some people, there's also the option to ask a question in the Q&A. There's a separate Q&A window that you can ask a question, and we can either answer it privately or we'll answer it for everyone on the call. And for people on the phone, we cannot unmute you if you're just dialed in through your phone and not on the computer. But if you have a question, email it to organize@foe.org, and we'll be checking that. And if someone wants to ask a question live, you can also raise your hand. And if we have time, we can unmute you. So I'll just give folks a couple minutes, and then I'll read off just a couple. I already kind of bundled some questions that we can start with. And maybe for Tiffany, there were some good questions directed, about food-related Green New Deal policies. Tiffany, there's like a couple questions. I'll just say them all at once, and maybe you can answer. So Beth Chow said that her senator said that the Green New Deal hurts farmers, which is not true. And it, any kind of information you can give about why the Green New Deal won't hurt farmers, And another question is, from Jeannie Michael, are there any specific plans for how changes in food production can be implemented? And then Kyra Rice said that she thought the current Green New Deal does in fact address industrial agriculture and farm workers. Maybe you can clarify some of that. Yeah.
Sure. Can you hear me, Jenny?
Mm-hmm.
So I think a couple things. As I mentioned, the language in the Green New Deal does talk about the need to address our agricultural system, but it's pretty vague. So there's a lot that needs to be done to flesh that out, to make sure that we are really doing a number of things, including reforming our agricultural laws to make sure that labor laws to make sure agricultural workers are included. Right now they're excluded from labor laws, making sure that they're included, in all of the wording or in the Green New Deal around the need for living and family sustaining wages. So there's a lot that we need to make sure is fleshed out to make sure that what is already in the Green New Deal truly does support a transformation of our food and agricultural system. And I think there's been a lot of rhetoric in the news about how this Green New Deal is going to hurt farmers. But for Friends of the Earth's vision of how this could change our food and farming system that I talked about earlier in the call, what we know is that it actually would really help a lot of farmers. Farmers that are using organic, regenerative agriculture systems tend to be more profitable than chemical-intensive farmers. And if we can make sure folks get information about this after the call that's circulated on the exact numbers of what that difference in profit margin is, But a lot of the changes we would like to see would help make sure that, one, there's more support for farmers to make that transition into organic and agroecological farming systems, and two, that we reform some of the systemic laws within our farming system right now, including some of our antitrust laws, to make sure that farmers are getting fair prices, they're able to compete, and that small and mid-scale farmers are able to really thrive, and that they are not pushed out of our system because of corporate consolidation and concentration that's happening in our food system, and that we really stop that from continuing. So there's a lot we want to see, but we think it's possible. We have the policies in a lot of cases that are already drafted and before Congress that could be incorporated into the Green New Deal that could get us to where we want to go. So it's just a matter of Congress really implementing what we already know is feasible.
Sunny, I wanted to add something really quickly, not specifically on the agricultural pieces, but one of the things that's the most confusing about this moment is exactly what was introduced by Markey and AOC's office. It's a resolution, which isn't even a bill. And so when people say, I thought it was already in the Green New Deal bill, or ask about that, there isn't yet an actual piece of legislation that's been introduced. There's a resolution that's been introduced. So even if that passed, it wouldn't become law. That's actually a good thing for us, because it means that the bills to actually map out what is a Green New Deal, they haven't been written yet. And so part of this is about how do we make sure that when a piece of legislation is introduced into the House and Senate, it actually is strong enough to address the things that Tiffany and I have been talking about, which means that the Green New Deal is not yet fully mapped out, and we have an opportunity to really influence the language that's in it by making sure that we're really loud and clear about what needs to be in a strong Green New Deal to really address all these problems.
Okay, thanks Liz and Tiffany. I think, I don't know, a basic question someone asked in the beginning to Timothy Beckman is, I guess, I don't know if we answered it fully. One question is, what are we doing to revise the Green New Deal so that it does apply, to fossil fuels, or that it means we won't have fossil fuels? And someone mentioned there's other forms of climate policies out there, like the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and how does that relate to the Green New Deal? And someone asked to get to that. Michael Buza asked, to get to zero carbon emissions, we need to help the poor with housing and transportation. Is there a plan to do that?
Jenny, let me take those couple of
Sure.
things. So how do we get to actually having a Green New Deal that that directly addresses fossil fuels and has a plan to phase it out? This is 100% why you're all on the phone with us today. Our analysis is that we need to be doing as much organizing across the country to take this broad energy about a Green New Deal and make sure that that broad energy for a Green New Deal is 100% around the idea that it has to address the fossil fuel industry. So I think that's all about organizing. We have to organize strong enough to counteract the $55 million I told you that the folks who voted against the resolution had gotten from the fossil fuel industry. Now, that's a tall order, but this has actually inspired more people to be standing up across the country in a shorter period of time than kind of anything related to climate that I've been involved in. And the great thing is that this is meant to be comprehensive on a number of fronts. So I think we have an opportunity to really make sure that it does address it. But yes, this one piece of legislation is not going to address all of our issues around energy, international climate issues. So there is a lot of companion work on the international level, on the state and local level, around specific fuel sources, around making sure that we're protecting forests, which are basically the lungs of the earth. So there's going to be a number of things that aren't going to be in the Green New Deal, but making sure that this is as strong as it possibly can is a huge starting place for us to build on as we look at these other measures. Even things like working internationally with other countries to make sure that we are looking at how do we make sure that places like the United States are actually really digging deep and changing their energy systems and not putting that burden on countries that haven't maybe used as much energy as we have. And then on the transportation and housing, one of the things that has been discussed is the need to really address our transportation systems. If you scroll through the chat, you'll see that that's one of Friends of the Earth core demands around a strong Green New Deal as well.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the time we have, but thank you everyone for your enthusiastic comments and questions. Keep them coming. I'll chat in the organize@fo.org email in case you have more questions or comments. I'm gonna kick it off to Brianna to close this out.
All right. Hi, everybody. So now we just want to talk about what's next now. So what's next? So tomorrow you're going to hear from us tomorrow by email. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone. And some materials to expect in that email will be a recording of the call tonight. We'll also send a lobby meeting how-to guide. That's just a really helpful toolkit paired with the really great training that we went through tonight. And that will include items like information on the Green New Deal, lobby visit best practices, a checklist of suggested materials, a sample meeting request letter, and a sample agenda for your meeting. We'll also send out an April recess sign-up form that includes the same poll questions that we asked earlier in the call. And so if you answered that poll, or if you didn't get to answer that poll, please fill out this form and let us know how you want to be involved so that we can get in touch with you. And actually right now, if you take a look at the chat, I'm going to actually chat out that form right now. So, for those of you on the computer, you can get a head start in filling it out. So please see that, and maybe someone will rechat it if you miss it. Also, we'll send a form. So Drew talked earlier about bird dogging, and there'll also be another form later sent out if you want to request coaching or help for bird dogging. But that's something that you would fill out if you find out that your member of Congress is coming near you. So you know the date, you know the event, you know the location, and you want to bird dog. So look out for those materials, and we'll also be calling folks who signed up on the Google form with the ways that you've indicated you can take action. Lastly, if you have any questions, reach out to us at our email. I think Jenny chatted that in, so it's organize@foe.org. And thank you all so much for joining the call today. There's just been a lot of enthusiasm in the chat tonight. And excited to continue this work together to push for a strong Green New Deal. So good night, everyone. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much
y'all.
for coming.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.